Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, we've had two very inspirational demonstrations of the word enough already here this morning. Thank you for that. And as
Welcome.
usual, I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction. So this morning's talk actually came from a news blurb that I heard. And although I published the title Enough Already, the working title at the top of my page is WTF, because that was my immediate reaction when I heard this particular bit of news, and I'll discuss that here briefly in a moment. So this morning, I am calling out to all women, men who support women, non binary identifiers, and anyone else who finds themselves rejected by their church, state, or family due to the arrangement of their chromosomes. I'm calling out because I have had enough already of humans passing judgment on the works of God. Now, this is a science of mind talk, and we often use the word spirit in substitute for God, and if you're more comfortable with that, please do that quietly in your mind. I will use the term God because it is generally understood. I hope I'm not pushing your buttons, but if I am, I invite you to look at that because it's your button. But to get back to our subject, the science of mind accepts you just the way you are because there ain't nothing wrong with you. So, how is it we find ourselves still empowering people who are afraid of someone because of something no one can control? Whether we are born male, female, or some variation thereof is not a choice anyone makes, nor is it an affliction or a disease to be eradicated. How that particular cookie crumbles is simply spirit in action, a perfect manifestation of the energy that stimulated the demonstration. I find it sad in 2023 that we are still talking about this. But at its recent convention, one of the most prominent Protestant church organizations in the United States ousted 5 of its member churches for the unforgivable sin of having women in their pulpits. And I heard that, and in my mind, I went, WTF. What are they thinking in this day and age that women cannot serve in a pulpit? That we can judge people by the arrangement of their chromosomes? They reasoned, you see, that Scripture says only men are qualified to lead a church. Scripture, which, by the way, has always been attributed to male authors commissioned by organizations led by male administrators. Do you see a pattern here? It is the same type of thinking that allows people to justify judging other people by the color of their skin, their regional origins, or their spiritual traditions. This very scripture teaches us we are created in the image of God. What part of that is confusing? If we are created in the image of God, then what we are is God. Science of mind says we are all expressions of the one mind. Either way, whatever we are not a mistake. Why do we see it so differently? The science of mind teaching is one of the few spiritual teachings on this planet, in this human race, that removes judgment from the equation. When we guide our choices in life using spiritual principles, judgment plays no role in our experience. This is the secret to internal happiness. When we stop expecting others to perform in a predetermined manner, one we have judged to be correct, they can't disappoint us. When we stop expecting ourselves to perform in a predetermined manner, a manner others expect of us, we cannot disappoint ourselves. History professor Kimberly Hamlin says, for decades, the generally held belief was that for early humans, men were the hunters and women were gatherers. But a new study suggests that this view is simply wrong, that women were also hunting. The implication of these results are potentially enormous. Next to the myth that God made a woman from man's rib, the human hunter-gatherer myth is probably the second most enduring myth that naturalizes the inferiority of women, and consequently anything not clearly defined as male. By the way, that whole made from a man's rib thing is also from Scripture. And pardon me if my advice today is to take that little gem with a grain of salt, too. This study suggests our earliest ancestors recognized the value in cross-training, diversification, decentralization, and divergence of power, so they wouldn't one day come home to their cave only to find all their stuff neatly tucked away behind a bear who has settled in for the winter. Now, I consider myself to have been a reasonably fortunate child. Don't ask little Glenn whether he felt fortunate at the time, but in retrospect, I have a much better view of my childhood and realize that my parents were a little bit unconventional in the norms of our time. Both had left their hometown environments. They had moved across the country during wartime and were no longer stifled by the environment in which they grew up. And both married a little later in life than most of their peers, so they had a little more experience under their belts. They had been around the block a couple of times, and both their sphere of influence, of experience, their sphere of experience had expanded beyond the limited common consciousness of their upbringing. So the influence of their experience, you see, gave me a head start along my spiritual development by having already shed the prejudices of ignorance so readily accepted in the time. My parents had friends who didn't look like us, and that was normal in our household. Not to say I wasn't aware of the ignorance so readily accepted in the time, but I was fully primed to release those misguided ideas when a more sincere spiritual teaching was revealed to me. The study of evolution teaches us there are countless false starts for every successful evolution, and every successful evolution is merely a step on a continuing evolutionary journey. Medieval armor suggests the human body was typically smaller 400 years ago than it is today. Entire species go extinct every day, and our climate is progressively dynamic. Who's to say what we recognize today as male or female, or even human for that matter, is the final version envisioned to steward planet Earth? Diksha Chapathi, in writing in Being a Macho Man, writes, "Let every girl and boy decide who they want to be. Break the cage. Let them fly free." You see, holding to a predefined set of specifications is a recipe for disaster. Every major accomplishment of humanity has benefited from trial and error. If the builders of the Leaning Tower of Pisa had not been willing to adjust their thinking on the fly, the site of the tower might today be a strip mall with a Starbucks in on either end, because the tower would have unceremoniously failed long ago. Andy Chapman, I believe, is the mayor of Incline Village in Nevada, or at least he was speaking from there the other day, and he wrote, in deciding to use drones instead of fireworks, we asked ourselves, is throwing lit objects up into the sky in the height of fire season the best thing for us to do? Just because it has always been done that way has never been an argument that held up for very long. We humans evolve constantly. We find problems and we develop solutions. We now have a technology that allows us to celebrate in a traditional way without the traditional problem of setting fire to the mountainside. So it is with people. Spirit did not set on earth a perfectly formed and evolved human, expecting it to reproduce in kind over and over again. In fact, we know for certain that cloning, which is what that would be, eventually degrades the product over generations. Before there were digital files, a master copy was always used to reproduce documents, because copies of copies eventually became unreadable. Let them fly free. Let them find the currents that carry them higher or farther, or both. Let them choose for themselves what happiness looks like. Spirit gave us freedom of choice, not to clone ourselves again and again, but to make random decisions based on random inputs that cause us to take off in random directions, creating wholly unplanned results. It is an intentional tool, this freedom of choice, to generate chaos in the process. Spirit exists to create and relies on our fertile imaginations to inform those creations. Spirit is fine with whatever our path is. Are we better than Spirit, that in whose image we are formed? Honor the true character of every person. Be thankful for the courageous souls who live authentically out loud. Life will always be life. Stuff happens. Becoming spiritual is not a guarantee for all of life's circumstances to change. It is a guarantee for our experience of circumstances to change. Not always in the time frame we want. In fact, seldom in the time frame we want. We live in these finite shells that we call this life, and we recognize linear time, and we recognize how short it actually is. I mentioned before we came on camera that I'm wearing white today because I recognize that summer will be gone so quickly that Labor Day will be here, and I don't want to be caught wearing white after Labor Day, so I want to wear it now in the summertime while I'm thinking about it. But Spirit doesn't have this clock, it doesn't have this calendar. So internal changes are more readily available, while changes to the common consciousness may take a little longer, you see. We can change ourselves in an instant. What I think of what's going on around me, I can dive into the despair, or I can rise above it and see the good or find the good. But getting the rest of humanity to see it that way, it's going to take us each one at a time finding our own path to bend the common consciousness and change it permanently. That could take a little longer unless we all get really good at this really fast. Now, Coretta Scott King famously said that the fight for civil rights must be fought and won with each generation. And in light of recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings, Vice President Kamala Harris said, "We are the generation she spoke of." We like to think in our lifetime that there has been improvement in all of the areas of which we are concerned. I know I certainly sat back on my laurels briefly, thinking that so many issues that were important when I was younger had been settled. Even though I knew in my heart of hearts, probably not so, and now in recent times it's just come to the surface again, and I'm thinking, oh my God, have the 70 years past been wasted? No, they haven't been wasted, but they haven't been as successful as me in this finite shell would like for them to have been. They haven't settled all of those arguments. They haven't removed all of those silly little issues that people seem to hang up on. And our progress hasn't been as fast as I would like it to be, because you see, I would like to see it finished. I would like to see us all cross that spiritual finish line together. However, we've been marching in this direction for a couple 100,000 years now, and truth be told, I doubt if I'll still be around when we finally get there. Looks like a couple of more generations are going to be required to do all of that. But you know, Carolyn Mist in Sacred Contracts wrote that once we are awakened to something, a truth or an injustice, we are held accountable and must take action according to that truth. We cannot ignore or suppress that awareness. There's no going back. This is where I really love the Eagles song Hotel California, where it ends, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Once you're aware, you're in the fight, and you can't get out of it, because awareness is a requirement for action. We are the generation to continue the evolutionary march towards spiritual awakening. One choice at a time, one revelation of truth, one courageous moment where we turn and stand and declare, enough already. The old beliefs have been tried and tried. The old beliefs have been dictated by law, enforced by punishment, and proven to fail again and again. Enough already. People talk about having the peace of God. Well, how does God have peace? If you think God is the bearded man in the sky with a book of deeds that need to be judged, certainly there can't be peace. This is the world where we have an angry God, a judgmental God. But when you consider God as just a loving spirit that creates for us as we believe without judgment or question, we can understand the peace of God. Remove judgment, insert peace. Imagine coming home to a sink full of dirty dishes you expect to be clean and reacting by simply saying, "Oh, the dishes are still there to be washed," and thinking, "Something for me to do. So be it." Now, precious few of us grew up with mothers who reacted so spiritually. More likely, we experienced something short of peace, more like some sort of domestic explosion when such things occurred, but even our reaction to that is within our choice. We can roll up our sleeves and jump into the drama, or we can roll up our sleeves and wash the dishes. We can elect representatives into government who understand our unity with spirit and each other. We can demonstrate compassion for the disenfranchised. We can support the coworker who claims to have been abused by a system traditionally unsympathetic toward them. We can be more like spirit when faced with someone who is different from us and simply accept them for what they are. And it really isn't all that hard to do. Researchers at UCLA found small acts of kindness are frequent and universal, that in fact humans are wired for kindness. No matter the culture they're from, being kind-hearted is simply part of human nature. No one goes to war by choice. They go because their government, their church, or their pride told them to. Once there, the universal desire is to go home. Given a chance, maybe help put right some of the damage they've done. Jackie Lewis, a Presbyterian minister, wrote, "We belong to a web of connection, well-being, and love. At the root of this union is empathy. The result is kindness, compassion, respect, and understanding." So how is it we continue to empower people and institutions who run counter to human nature? We are the image of God, all of us. The wealthy and successful, the infirmed, and even the insane. Male, female, light, dark, and evolving. We are all the image of God. Enough already. By releasing our fears, our prejudices, and judgments, we can bend the common consciousness toward its eventual spiritual evolutionary goal. More importantly, by releasing our fears, prejudices, and judgments, we can personally enjoy whatever has been served up by life for us today and enjoy it fully, knowing it too is the image of God. Thank you.